Iran and Israel are in a bitter and dangerous war, and on the brink of something that could lead to major destabilization in the Middle East region, and maybe to a World War III. Their conflict dominates headlines, nuclear ambitions, proxy wars, fiery speeches. It feels like a modern clash of ideologies, but the roots run far deeper. But what if I told you this conflict is 2,500 years in the making? The Persian Empire reshaped both their destinies. The relationship between Iranians and Jews is among the oldest in human civilization. It began with a moment of profound generosity, a Persian king who freed a conquered people. This is not just a story of politics, but of an ancient friendship now lost to memory. To understand what's happening right now, you have to go way back to the empire that never really died. In June 2025, Israel's strikes on Iran's nuclear sites have the world holding its breath. But to understand this clash, we need to travel back 2,500 years to the Persian Empire, a superpower that once ruled 3 continents and honestly changed history forever. What set Persia apart was its revolutionary idea rule through tolerance, not terror. Conquered peoples kept their traditions. Local religions were respected, sometimes even supported. How did the king called Cyrus the Great forge a bond with ancient Israel? And why does it matter for today's war? Behind every drone strike and diplomatic threat lies a ghost, the ghost of Persia or the Great Persian Empire. Imagine, just for a moment, an empire so vast it stretched from Egypt to India, uniting 40% of the world's population. That was the Persian Empire, founded by Cyrus the Great in 550 BCE. Previous empires ruled by fear, Cyrus ruled by respect. This wasn't just a kingdom of conquest, it was a revolution. Cyrus built the first global postal system governed with tolerance and let every culture keep their traditions. It set the stage for everything from human rights to modern nationalism. But here's the kicker. His empire wasn't just about power, it was about peace. Greeks, Egyptians, Babylonians and more lived under the great king, largely free to live as they wished. Diversity was seen as strength, not weakness, and that peace would change the fate of a small nation called Judah. The Persian Empire's philosophy would change the course of Jewish history. But here's where it gets, well, a bit eerie. Iran today still sees itself as Persia reborn. And once you see how that identity plays into today's politics, you won't look at the news the same way again. For the Jews, the 6th century BC was a time of despair. Jerusalem destroyed, the temple in ruins, exiled in Babylon. In 539 BCE, Cyrus the Great did something no ruler had dared. He conquered Babylon. He issued the first known declaration of human rights. He freed the Jews from Babylonian captivity and issued a decree sending 40,000 back to Judah to rebuild their temple. The Bible calls him God's anointed or the liberator, Persian king hailed as a savior. That one act etched Persia into Jewish history forever and well planted the seeds of an unlikely relationship. Fast forward to the book of Esther, where another Persian ruler, possibly Xerxes, saves the Jews from a genocide plot. Persia wasn't Israel's enemy, it was their protector. Even today, Jewish pilgrims still visit Esther's tomb in Iran. For 2 centuries, Judea thrived as a Persian province, enjoying peace and religious autonomy. Judaism as we know it was shaped during this era of Persian patronage. The memory of Cyrus became a cornerstone of Jewish identity. This golden age of friendship would echo through the centuries. But then, came the power games, Darius, Xerxes, the wars with Greece, and Persia became something else, a symbol of Eastern dominance and Western resistance. Even Alexander the Great, after defeating Persia, married a Persian woman. Why? Because Persia wasn't just an empire, it was civilization itself. So, how did these allies become enemies? You won't believe what happened next. For centuries, Persia's legacy of tolerance faded, but Iran and Israel weren't always foes. Fast forward 2,000 years. The empire falls, rises again under the Sassanids, and then collapses under the Islamic conquest. But Persia never disappeared. Its language, its myths, its pride survived. Iranians became both proud Muslims and heirs to Cyrus. This dual identity, Islamic and Persian, remains central to Iran today. Later, Shah Islam and encounters with colonial powers deepened this sense of uniqueness. The sands of identity shifted, but the bedrock of the ancient past remained. In the 20th century, the ancient friendship between Persians and Jews seemed to endure. When Israel was founded in 1948, Iran, under the Shah, was among the first Muslim nations to recognize it. The Shah saw Israel as a natural ally, both non-Arab and Western-aligned. Under the Shah in the 1960s, Iran supplied oil to Israel, seeing them as allies against Arab rivals. They shared intelligence, traded and cooperated on many fronts. The Shah promoted Iran's pre-Islamic identity, linking himself to Cyrus the Great. In 1971, he celebrated 2,500 years of Persian monarchy at Persepolis. For a time, Iran and Israel were close partners. But in 1979, the Islamic Revolution flipped everything. The Shah was overthrown, and the new leaders of Iran didn't erase Persia, they rebranded it. Iran's new leaders severed ties with Israel and called Israel an enemy, sparking decades of proxy wars. Israel became the little Satan, a symbol of everything the revolution opposed. Today, Israel's strikes on Iran's nuclear sites and Iran's missile barrages have pushed them to the brink. Suddenly, the Islamic Republic of Iran was drawing from both Islamic tradition and ancient Persian nationalism, a strange blend that still confuses outsiders today. From the tomb of Cyrus to modern Iranian missile names Zolfagar, Kebar, every move carries echoes of the past. The shift was total history rewritten, alliances reversed. The ancient bond was buried beneath a new political reality. Now here's the twist. Cyrus freed the Jews. Iran today threatens Israel. What happened? In today's Iran-Israel conflict, history itself is weaponized. Both sides twist the past to justify their actions and rally support. Shared heritage is ignored or distorted, replaced by narratives of eternal enmity. In Iran's leadership circles, today's struggle isn't just political, it's historical. It's seen as a continuation of ancient battles between East and West, empire and resistance, identity and survival. And Israel? It sees Iran not just as a threat, but as an heir to a centuries-old power struggle. One where survival depends on never forgetting history. These narratives turn a geopolitical dispute into a mythic struggle. The story of Cyrus the Liberator is forgotten, centuries of coexistence erased. History becomes a tool for division, not understanding. So why does this matter? The Persian Empire's legacy is a story of contradiction. On one side, Cyrus the Great's Persia, tolerant, multicultural, a model of enlightened power. This legacy forged a bond of friendship with the Jewish people. On the other, Persia as a symbol of national pride and regional ambition. Modern leaders invoke this legacy to project strength, sometimes fueling confrontation. The tragedy is that the legacy of conflict now overshadows the legacy of friendship. Because when two nations both believe they're living out history, they don't compromise. They compete for legacy. Yet, the other half of the legacy remains, waiting to be rediscovered. It reminds us that another way is possible. The future depends on which part of the past Iran and Israel choose to embrace. Can history offer a path away from conflict? Can the ghost of Cyrus inspire a different future? The divide between Iran and Israel seems vast, but history teaches that nothing is permanent. Enemies can become friends, alliances can shift. For most of their shared history, Persians and Jews coexisted in peace and respect. The current hostility is the exception, not the rule. We can't return to the age of Cyrus, but we can learn from his principles, tolerance, respect, and the strength of diversity. Ancient Persia isn't in museums, it's in war rooms, in speeches, in missiles, it's in the headlines right now. From Cyrus the Great's peace to today's Iran-Israel tensions, the Persian Empire's legacy reminds us how history shapes our world. Could the tolerance of 2,500 years ago inspire a path to peace today? If history really is repeating itself, what page are we on now? What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe if you want more stories that connect today's chaos to yesterday's empires, because sometimes the only way to understand today is to dig up the past.